Hi, this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. We're still doing our pandemic projects, and this one comes in from Steve out in Huntington Beach, California. So I'm assuming Steve is fishing the Huntington Beach Pier, among other things. And I'm familiar with that pier because I have a brother that lives in California, and we've gone down that way. So we have an oldie but a goodie. This is the Shimano. It's the Speedmaster Triton. It's the TSS 4. It's a nice size reel. It's probably a 60 or 70 size reel. It's circa 1990s based on case design. I haven't gone in and actually looked it up. The reel was made in Japan, and it's before reels became a fashion statement. It's when they started with the graphite cases, but before they started with all the fancy colors and metal work and the like. So I haven't done one of these, so I thought we would take you through this one. It's a nice high-speed retrieve. It's got a 5.8 to 1, and as I mentioned, it's a big one. It's got capacity for 270 yards or 20-pound line. So Shimano makes a nice product, and we're going to show you how that was made then and why it's lasted as long as it has. So I start by taking off the exterior pieces. The first one would be the handle. And you want to look at the handle. Does the side cap opposite the handle move? In this case, it's not moving. That usually means that this is a screw-in handle as opposed to a through handle. But don't be surprised sometimes if you're trying to unscrew the handle and it's just not giving on you. The answer is that there's a screw hiding here, so underneath that cap. But for the most part, first test is that. And if you have any doubts, take that cap off, take a look and see if it's there. So we're going to remove the handle in a clockwise manner. That means turning away from you. And as we do this, I want to thank our first responders and essential personnel and everybody involved in keeping us safe and interested in our well-being during this pandemic. I've been kind of trying to do these things sort of as diversions to just take people's minds off of everything that's going on. But there's people out there putting their lives on the line every day and working hard to keep us safe, and I thank you for that. You're our hometown heroes. I'm going to remove the case bottom now. The case bottom has 4 side screws to it, and this one comes off without removing the rotor first. You can always note that by looking underneath the rotor, and if you see that there's a seam for the case here, that means that can come out independent of the other. I'm going to take this off. We're going to have to service the drags on it at some point, so I'll take this off to do that. And you can see Shimano went to the trouble of putting a little bit of a plastic shield in there to keep this watertight. I think that actually says that on there, doesn't it? Waterproof drag, yep. So we'll show you how that's made when we get done with the balance of this. So 4 screws. These can be taken out by a Phillips head screwdriver or a flat blade. I find that the through slot for the flat blade works a little bit better if you need some leverage to move this one along. This reel says it's 3 ball bearings. We'll take a look at that. I get asked a lot about how many ball bearings should a reel have. I think Armando would tell you 20. That's kind of an inside joke, but you need, I think 3 is optimal at a minimum. And that assumes that it doesn't have an anti-reverse clutch or roller bearing that's being counted as it. Sometimes you'll see 3 plus 1 or something like that, the plus 1 being that roller bearing clutch, the anti-reverse. I'm pretty sure this reel is too old to have incorporated that instant anti-reverse technology, but we'll find that out as well as we go through this reel. I kind of am flying blind here. I didn't go pull a schematic. I've worked on several of these Shimanos. I sort of know the pattern to it, but I would recommend if you don't know the pattern of the reel, go ahead and go out to the web and get the schematic for the reel. And also take pictures along the way. Use your cell phone, use a stationary camera. Heck, do what I'm doing, make a movie if you like. That'll give you the orientation, it'll give you the way that you took these off, the sequence, and when you go to reinstall, if you have any questions, you can just go back and look at your pictures. So 4 screws, I put them in my parts tray. That's the only thing in my parts tray at the moment. Normally I would lay these on a desk, but I wanted to make sure that all of those screws are the same size. If they're not the same size, you remember which hole which came out of. All right, nice metal side plate. I had said graphite before. This is metal. I think the case, yeah, the case is graphite. And we have one screw that's tying down the axle, so we're going to go ahead and take that out. And this is typical of a nice quality Shimano reel. It's not over-engineered. They're heavy-duty parts, so they're unlikely to break under stress. And they're just well made. This one was made in Japan. I guess that also tells us a little bit about the dating. A lot of Shimano's manufacturing has moved away from Japan. They're in Malaysia and Thailand, I think, and some other places, maybe even China at this point. But there's a lot of that that's gone on. Once you remove that screw, pull out your axle shaft. That came out nice and easy. That's a good indication that that's not worn or bent. Now you can remove your main gear. You'll see we have a bearing on the main gear. And we have the bearing on the other side. So we were talking about what's the optimal number. Well, 3 to me is the optimal number. 1 on each side of the main gear. And 1 up on the pinion gear. That seems to be plenty. This reel doesn't seem like it has had a lot of use. That's good. We're going to just take off the dried grease. That looks like the only thing that's kind of needed in this service here is just kind of clean it. Check all of the teeth and the orientation of the teeth. Make sure that they're not scarred or chipped or broken. Also check it this way. See if there's any unevenness in the teeth wear. Sometimes that's an indication of a warped gear if you find that the teeth are not uniform. I'm going to take out the oscillating gear or the crosswind gear, the crosswind block, and that's the bottom of the case here. There's not much going on. Simplicity in design always wins. At least in my mind. Just going to get the old grease out from behind here. I've taken out the bearings. I'm going to oil those. I oil bearings rather than grease them. Sometimes folks would like to grease them, and to me the grease is a trap, especially if you're on the outside of the reel. Grease is going to hold dirt and contaminants, so I don't generally do that. I'm just going to move these to the side. I could put those into my tray if I like. I'm going to take that one little shim washer, which factory puts on to get the right calibration on the main gear to the pinion gear. I'll put that back on. And we're just going to go up top then and remove the rotor so that we can get to the internal, which would be pulling that pinion gear and making sure that's clean. While I have that rotor here, I do notice that there's an accumulation of some dirt on the bail, so I'm just going to give that a quick hosing with some penetrating oil. You don't need to remove a bail if the bail is working. I have a lot of people send me in bails because they removed it and can't get the springs back on. Well, I kind of know how the springs go back on, but you don't need to do that in a general maintenance. Of course, if your bail's not working, then you want to go right away and remove that bail and determine why it's not working and do the like. In this case, if you need to remove the bail, there's a C-clip on the inside here, which is holding that arm, and a screw over here, which is holding this arm. That'll enable you to take it out and do the work on that bail. All right, rotor comes off. It's nice and clean inside. There is a trip ramp here. It's going to get some of the white grease in there. There's a trip ramp. As you push this bail open, that trip ramp is going to be rides along the surface, and as it encounters this ramp, it's going to push that back up like this. Now, I don't have the hand strength. It's going to push it back up as it rides. That's going to close your bail. You want to pay attention up top here when you do this. Again, the evidence that this reel has not been used much at all. There's a little eccentric with a spring on it that's going to control your anti-reverse dog. In this case, the anti-reverse is a ratchet that's attached below, and this happens to be an override, so as you're reeling, that anti-reverse dog can't move in because of the override. But when you flip that override switch, you're reeling in this direction. As soon as you go to backpedal, that spring is going to pull it in. That spring is going to cause that anti-reverse dog to engage with the ratchet. I'll bring this up a little bit closer so you can see. Reeling, it's off. As soon as you stop, it pulls that dog in, and that's the way it's set. So if you need to remove this for any reason, know that that's the orientation of it with the tag end to this piece here. All you have to do on this is a little squirt of oil where it's going through the case. Sometimes dirt and the like will accumulate there and make it tough. All right, I'm going to remove the top collar here. Just be careful, you don't want to bend that spring. It is riding in a groove. I'm going to lay that right down so I know the orientation of that. And we have that ratchet, and again I'm going to leave that just so I know the orientation of it. Then we have a little bit of a click collar here. Take that out as well. I'm just kind of putting that in an orientation of how it came about. I'm going to flip that override switch, so I think I can clear the three screws here so that I can pull the pinion gear out. So let's go do that. When I do this, I like to do a couple of things. I want to make sure all those screws are the same length, just like we were doing on the main body. And I also want to check the orientation on these screws so that I put that collar back correctly. Now in this case, you're going to notice that we have an offset on that collar. So that offset on the collar goes deep where the other two lay flat. That should enable me to pull the bearing and the pinion gear out. That was easy. I didn't expect it to be difficult given the condition of this reel. We have a shim washer up top. If you don't put that shim washer in, that rotor is going to ride tough. We have another ball bearing, so I'm going to oil that nicely, give it a drink. Notice that the sealed side is up, or the shielded side is up, and the ball bearing side is down. That'll enable us to clean off the pinion gear. I like to use a little bristle brush to get in the grooves. There's not much here. I think if there's anything to be said about this reel, it's that the reel has just got dried grease from hanging around as long as it has without the maintenance. I'm going to get my grease brush out then. I know I got a lot of stuff going on my desk. Normally I would put that into my parts tray, but for some reason today I'm not doing that. That'll be the day I knock a piece onto the ground. Alright, so that's how you lube up your pinion gear. Next up, we noticed as we go to reassemble that this was the downside of the bearing. And then we have that shim washer that we were talking about in terms of making sure that's on there. I have a little washer underneath here that we need to make sure is fitting right for the axle shaft. There we go. I'm trying to get it out there. That belongs as a sleeve on here. And when you go to install, there's a flat side in the back here, and that's where that rests. So when you go to put that in, that's the proper install. You won't see the plastic piece which is resting against the case in the back. So that's the way that installs. Remember, we have the lip on this one, so that goes in. It's kind of hard to misinstall, but it is possible. So just be careful on that. I've seen all kinds of things come in over the years involving the misinstallation of a piece, and that's one of the reasons why I've come to appreciate modern technology and cell phone cameras and the like, where you can track your progress. That's where that tip has come from. There's days where I wish I had taken a picture. Now, of course, doing these on YouTube videos, you're not going to see me take pictures because I'm taking the picture with the video. But there's a lot of times, particularly on a reel that I'm not familiar with, where I will stop and take a picture, or I'll stop and get the schematic, or both. And that's just kind of self-preservation. If you mess something up, it takes you a lot of time to unwind it, or worse, or you can't. All right. So that goes back on. We noted on the shield that this was the downside. This one was particularly interesting in terms of getting it off. It was a little tight. There we go. So that's back on. And we have our anti-reverse ratchet. And if there's any question, which side goes to which, well, it's kind of easy to see because you can put it on the one way and make sure that you intersect with that dog. And if it doesn't, then of course, put it on the other way. You've got a little butterfly here I put these both on at the same time. And it only takes a little bit of opening to get that spring around the post, so don't go crazy in terms of pressing it down too hard. That's our top assembly. I come back here. We mentioned that this is all clean here. There is a groove here, a nut rotor, that corresponds with this groove. You're going to have to work a little bit to get it on all the way. In this case, I just got lucky, I guess. And we'll put that nut on top now, the rotor nut. And sometimes it's hard to get this nut locked in because of the lip. Don't be afraid to use a deep socket as your way to tighten it down. Before I go any further, I'm just going to spin it, make sure that we have a nice spin to it. There's no sense putting some other pieces in there only to find out that you got to redo it or something got jammed while you were doing that. There is one tie down screw now that goes into that hole, and that'll keep that rotor nut from spinning. Alright, there we go. And if you like, you can test your rotor trip lever at this point as well. Let's go downtown then, and we're going to service the crosswind gear or oscillating gear. This is pretty straightforward. It's real clean, so you want to get grease on just about everything here. I get the back because it's going to slide on that case. You want to get inside or put a little bit onto the stud where it's going to roll. You want to get it in the teeth because the teeth are going to drive with the back end of the main gear. You want to get it on the face because that's where your crosswind or oscillating block is going to ride. Now, I'll probably get in trouble there because I put the gear on before I put the bearing in the case. Sometimes you can just get that bearing in the case like I did there. Sometimes you have to put that bearing in before. On the back end, we also check to make sure all these teeth are in good condition and that they're clean. So we want to just go ahead and get some grease on that. I'm using a fishing wheel grease. I really don't care which fishing wheel grease you use, but I do care that you use a fishing wheel grease. In this case, I'm using Penn Precision Wheel Grease. It's widely available on the internet, and it'll service you well. If you try and put other household greases in there while you're on your own, I'm not going to tell you to do that or not do that, but I can tell you that I've seen a lot of dried greases and poor performance because the grease that was used was not intended for fishing reels and had different chemical properties to it. I've just put the grease onto the inside of the oscillating block or the crosswind block. I've just installed the main gear. That shim is on there now. I'm going to go ahead and put that bearing back on before we put the crosswind or before we put the axle shaft on. Clean that axle shaft off. I just use a paper towel. There's nothing there that's difficult about this one. Sometimes you'll find corrosion or dried grease or the like. You'll have to work with a little bit more aggressive, maybe a kitchen scrubby or a very light steel wool. But for now, that one just wiped off with a paper towel. So kind of stay to the least abrasive you can. And now we've got the screw that came out of the holder. That's going to attach the axle shaft to the crosswind block. So this is a good time to tell you if you like the art of reel repair, or you just enjoy watching these types of videos, or you have a reel that you want to get serviced or whatever, to hit that subscribe button. You get a look over my shoulder on most of the reels that I do in the shop, and it'll give you an idea how to go fix your own reel, or in the case of a hobby, you'll see how all different kinds of reels are made and how to come apart and how they get serviced. Put the case back on now. Give it a spin, just make sure nothing's tight. Boy, that's a beautiful reel for the age that it has. It's nice and quiet. Those 3-ball bearings are perfect, and the reel is nice. It's smooth and it's quiet. If it wasn't quiet, you would look at things like the bearings. Those are steel bearings, and if they got contaminated with a lot of salt water or the like, there's a good chance that over time they would wear down and get cranky, make a lot of noise. In this case, those bearings are good. After all these years, they look new. The whole inside of the reel looks new. Alright, I'm using that flat-bladed screwdriver because this has got the rough threads on them, and the Phillips head screwdriver I have, it seems like it's right between the two. The larger one just seems to be a bit too large, and the smaller one seems to be a bit too small. So they have a through slot on these screws, and that's a good place to use this flat-bladed screwdriver if you need to. So if you're working on a reel and you're stuck, if you have a question, maybe you've been working on this reel and you can't figure out how a piece goes together, and maybe for whatever reason I've omitted it in the video itself, then leave that question in the comments section, and on that I try to answer all of the comments generally within 24 hours. If I know the answer, I'll be happy to help. If I don't know the answer and can't research it, I'll let you know that I just don't know. And but if you ask it, I do try to respond. All right, we've got the water, doesn't say tight, but water resistant system here. You can see that there's salt coming out of these screws, or there's corrosion coming out of these screws, which means that water does get in the top of the drag, and that's not uncommon at all, because when you're reeling in line that goes on the spool, the first thing it's rubbing against is this lip of the spool here. And when it rubs against the lip of the spool, it's throwing the water on the top of it, and that water's got nowhere to go but inside the drag. So what they're trying to do here is at least put some protection by putting an extra little rubber piece in here. Alright, those 4 little screws are easily knocked off your bench, so make sure that you know where they are at all times. That's where a part tray can help. Take that little ring off, and then we can take these out. Now we have felt washers in here. We have a big stack of them. And some people get nervous when they hear that they've got felt washers in a reel. They think they're subject to tearing. They are if they are dry and if they're brittle. But the way to keep those maintained is to put oil on them. So we're going to take that felt washer there. I'm going to use a little fishing reel oil. A couple of drops. Then we have a series of round and a series of what are called eared washers. They alternate. So we'll put the first one in. And we have a second of the flats, and we go in with the keyed washer, or the eared washer, another we have our last of the felt washers, another keyed washer, and we have this cap washer before we put the protector back on. The lip of the screw is actually the hold down for that top piece. So the best way to do this so that you don't get it kind of bubbling up, if you will, if bubbling is the right term, is to go opposite corners, so kind of like north, south, east, west. If you try to do it in a circular pattern, easy for me to say, you may find a bubble on the one side because it just didn't grab right. The purpose of this collar is twofold. It's to keep the water out, and the other part is just to keep the drag stack there. It doesn't provide any drag power or compression. That's done by the drag adjuster knob. Okay, those 4 are in, they're tight. We're going to just put that back on. Somebody got on me the other day. I didn't put a drop of oil onto this click spring, so I hadn't put a drop of oil onto there. A lot of times I'm doing these and being human, subject to failure, people will point out the things that I forget to do. A lot of times I do catch it, sometimes I don't. Most of the time they're minor things. I do appreciate your comments and letting me know, proving once again that I am human. Alright, I'm just going to wipe some of the dust off of this one, or dirt, or whatever the case might be. This one belongs to Steve. This is a beautiful reel, Steve. We'll put the handle on, we'll give it a final test, and we'll mark this one ready to go fishing again. So this is the Shimano. It's the Speedmaster. It's a nice reel, and this one is, as I said, it's ready to go fishing again. We'll make sure that that bail is working fine. Very smooth, 3-ball bearing reel, and ready for action one more time. So please stay safe, stay well, stay aware of what's going on with this pandemic. Thank a first responder, and stay watching, stay fishing, and have a great day. This is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle.